What's up, you guys? Welcome to episode 399 of the Established Run NBA podcast. I'm Mike Gallagher. We're getting closer within 2 months to the NBA season here. The NFL preseason winding down. It's certainly fantasy football season. I had some football drafts over the weekend to get rolling. But we're going to take an early look at what we think the first round is going to be for our rankings for 9 category leagues. We'll talk a little 8 cat as well. For you season-long bros with me to do so is Drew Dinkmeyer. Dink, how's it going?
It's going well. I'm appreciating all the time that we've spent working on the projections the last few weeks and getting everything kind of squared away. And now it's time to talk through them and get to the fruits of the labor. So excited to diagnose the first round. We'll talk through kind of what early ADP looks like kind of around the industry, where our rankings look like around the industry, and also talk a little bit of kind of tiers around these, because there are players that can within the tiers kind of move dramatically based on, just based on small things with rankings. Like a game here or there would move guys in positionally order from an order perspective, but they're all kind of in the same tier. So I think it's important to kind of talk through and conceptualize where there's also potential tier breaks in the first round, so you understand kind of if you're applying for a lottery based position or draft position, how valuable it is to have what pick, I think is also useful in understanding. So we'll go through all that today.
Yeah, for sure. The top of the draft is quite valuable. I think that even the having an earlier pick in NBA feels more valuable to me than in football. Do you have a thought on that? As I feel like having a top 3 or maybe 4 are like really, really big comparing to, I think Luka is kind of more valuable than Jamar Chase is for football or something along the line. Do you have kind of a similar agreement about being 1, 2, 3, or 4 having more value?
I would say just really 1, 2 is just like enormously more valuable than everything else. So if you were to break out the tiers, so we have something called total value in our projections, and we're going to talk through this from a 9 category ranking perspective. So that's rotisserie based formats that include points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, 3-pointers made, field goal percentage, free throw percentage, and turnovers. Those are the 9 categories. 8 category leagues would have those same 9 categories, often not including turnovers. Obviously, some people will use custom leagues and formats and whatnot, but category based is the the original for fantasy NBA. So we'll talk through it from that perspective. But from a total value, if you really tier out the first round, we've got Victor Wembanyama with a total value of 11.9, and this is basically kind of a sum of the Z-score values that he adds kind of across categories. We have Jokic at 10.2. We have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at 8.9. And then we have Luka at 7.5. And then we have 5, 6, and 7 all in the 7s. And then it drops off into the 6s and 5s really quickly. So certainly a tier drop, I would say. 1 and 2 is like a big tier drop to everybody else. And then I think 3 to 4 is kind of another own tier drop almost. And then we've got Luka close to 5, 6, and 7, but honestly, Luka feels a lot more solid than 5, 6, and 7. So I'd say maybe a mini tier drop there. And then ultimately, once you get past 8, I would say in the first round, it's a big drop off, both in terms of quality and in terms of ceiling and upside, and also how you want to go about builds. For example, as we talk through these rankings, we're a little bit lower on Giannis Antetokounmpo, which we'll talk through. But a lot of that is just based on he's just destroys free throw percentage. And so it's very, very hard. And it depends on the type of league that you're playing in. If you're playing in overall contests, it's very hard to execute strategies where you're full punting a category in an overall contest, because you're competing with everybody in them. If you're in just a 12-team league or a 10-team league, 14-team league, whatever it is, you can get away with letting go of a category. But yeah, long-winded way of saying that I think especially the first 2 picks are exceptionally more valuable than everything else. And then I think the top half is far more valuable than the bottom half of the first round.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I'll just add with the Giannis point, if you're playing 8 cat, that that piece of the pie is a little bit bigger, being an 1/8 of the score versus the 1/9 of the score if you are punting and playing roto style. So yeah, let's get to it. As you kind of already said, I'll have my 150, which is a little bit different. The man versus machine pod's going to be very weird, because I was way more hands-on on coming up with the projections and stuff, so that'll be fun to go through. But yeah, Victor Wembanyama, I have him in number 1 in the 150, number 1 in the rankings as well. Was this how easy was it for you to put Wemby number 1?
I think it's really easy. it's his impact in blocks alone. He's like a league winner in the one category. Like you get him in blocks, you don't have to do much else. He's also a positive contributor in every single category, with the exception of turnovers, which, look, often the best players in the league are negatives in turnovers. They have the ball in their hands the most, so they're usually subtracting value from that category. But man, he's in this, that was off of a rookie season. Usually players take a step forward in their second season. So as incredible of a base as Nikola Jokic has provided, and also stability with Jokic, like the one argument you could give for drafting Jokic ahead of Wembanyama if you wanted was just the durability. Like we know the durability with Jokic is so good. The guy just doesn't miss games year in and year out. He also gives you an incredible foundation to build around. Basically, you're trading blocks for assists when you're moving from Wembanyama to Jokic, and you're getting a little bit better field goal percentage. But by our math, you're trading way too many blocks for the extra assists. So if Wemby stays healthy, Wemby should finish as the number one player in fantasy, and I'd be very surprised if he didn't, if he plays at least 65, 70 games. Jokic, the path to him finishing number one in fantasy, which look, he's done many times before, but largely is dependent on Wembanyama's health. Because I think if Wembanyama is fully healthy, I don't think Jokic, because of Wemby's unique contributions to the blocks category and his above average production in 3-pointers as well, I don't think Jokic can put up a season that's big enough to surpass him. Now, you can still build a great team around Jokic. You don't need your first round pick to be the number one overall player. But I think Wembanyama's just astronomical category changing contributions to blocks, and then his above average contributions to steals as well, really just sets you up incredibly well.
Yeah, I mean, post-break, in just 32.5 minutes per game, he was second in that category. 24, 12, and 5. 4.5 blocks is just out of this world. 1.5 steals. And there's room for growth. He's only 17th percentile as a spot-up shooter. Still only shot 53% on layups, so that number could certainly come up. But he could, maybe be really valuable in field goal percentage there. Just, again, like, he's 20 years old. He still could grow a lot, and there's places he could do it. I think Chris Paul helping him is another kind of bonus for him. I think that's going to put him in better spots to score. And yeah, just a year of growth. And who knows, maybe he blocks 5 shots this year. Maybe he grows even more there. So it's just hard to kind of bet against that. Usually I kind of live by, be safe early and then take my risks later. I don't know. I don't think there's really any risk in taking Wemby number one. So as you mentioned, 1-2 very, very clearly. I don't think we need to go over Nikola Jokic too much. But, yeah, you kind of alluded there's a pretty big gap. But, yeah, and you kind of outlined it. Is there anything you want to add on Jokic? It's pretty straightforward.
I would just say that historically it has been such a cheat code in rotisserie formats to be able to build through a big who gets assists. Because ultimately, like, in not even talking about Jokic, right? Like, Jokic is an outlier in terms of the assists that he creates from a center position. But I'm going historically back into like Pau Gasol, Marc Gasol, even getting 3 or 4 assists per game from your bigs has like really dampened the need that you have on point guards for your roster. And for 9 category leagues, that's very important because point guards often are really big negative contributors in turnovers and often field goal percentage. And so when you had a big kind of adding assists and not needing yourself to go out and get a bunch of point guard heavy lineups, you ended up being fine in assists and still protecting your percentages and your turnovers, which is like an incredible thing to do. So Wembanyama is an alien and he's in his own universe, but Jokic is also in that category, in the sense that the idea of getting 9 assists per game, which is what we're projecting from Nikola Jokic, with 59% field goal percentage and 82% free throw percentage, it's just such a pleasure to be able to build a team around him. Basically, any pick you make after Nikola Jokic works with Nikola Jokic. It's very similar to real basketball in that way, that the way he plays from a fantasy and a real life perspective just elevates every other player around him because he covers up so many weaknesses on your roster. So we spent a little bit of time covering how great and dynamic Wembanyama is. I don't want to leave out the fact that building around Jokic is a huge, massive edge as well, and has always historically been a bit of a cheat code for rotisserie formats, is finding assists through your bigs. And basically just like the way that I like to attack assists in 9 category leagues specifically is I like to have a team that is not trying to win assists overall, but trying to be like top 40 percentile in assists and then win turnovers, because turnovers are very predictable. And the best way to do that is finding guys who just always contribute assists, like 3-4 a game here and there. They pile up over time when you have a roster that's loaded with guys getting 3, 4, 5. You don't need to get the guys that get 8, 9. And at times you can build rosters that are much, much more competitive kind of across the board. So Jokic is just such a pleasure to build around. And if you're fortunate enough to get one of these top two spots in your league, I think you are playing from a big, big position of advantage.
Absolutely. Yeah. This, like I said 4 earlier, 1, 2 is just so clear that you're like anyone who doesn't pick, that's like a massive, massive hot take to have a top 2 pick and not take Joker and Wemby. And I mean, honestly, almost any format there. But yeah, and we talked about Jamal Murray looking really crappy. Maybe he's not healthy, and we saw him have a career high in assists the year Jamal was hurt. So if you want to bet against Jamal, that's a little bit pro Jokic to me. And I'm not too worried about him turning 30 in February. He's really shown no decline. He did shoot the ball a little bit worse from 3 last year, but certainly, he's going to shoot near 60%, which is obviously, going to be one of the best players in that category. And he shoots the free throws really well. So again, just absolutely made for fantasy. It's a little surprising that, I think I said last year that I think Jokic is going number 1 in fantasy for, until Wemby's ready. Well, that was quick. Wemby's already ready. So, okay, so we could just hop into number 3 a little bit, as you mentioned, pretty big dip here, kind of a coin flippy between 3 and 4, but the rankings and the 150 both have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as number 3. The best point guard, obviously shoots the ball really, really well here. He did cool off a little bit after the break, a little bit tied to injury. But should note, his splits without Giddey were awesome. 38.4 usage without him, 32.5 with him. How strongly do you feel about SGA being ranked number 3?
Very strongly, probably stronger than the field probably thinks. So like you referred to this as like a bit coin flippy. I think that's how the market is going to take it. And if you're in drafts, I wouldn't be surprised to see Luka go above SGA. I know that the Yahoo preordained rankings have it that way. I believe NFBKC, the first early drafts, they have it kind of split between Luka and Shai as like, those are the guys who go 3. And the other guy usually goes 4, at times 5. We'll talk about the 5th place player as well. But from our projection standpoint for 9 category leagues, that total value column that I explained before, we have Shai at 8.9 and we have Luka at 7.5. And there's a couple things here that go into this from Shai's perspective. He is really, really quite positive across the board. And we talked about how turnovers, oftentimes the first round players, it's not a place that they're additive in value. He is not additive in values in the turnover categories, but he really doesn't hurt you very much. His negative 1.1 Z score is one of the lowest of the first round players. And then every other category, he's at minimum flat in terms of his value above the average player selected. And he adds big bumps in field goal percentage and in free throw percentage. And free throw percentage, he's exceptionally valuable because of how often he gets to the line and how well he shoots from the line. And that is the whole difference between these two players, in my opinion. So the extra 3.5 rebounds per game that you'll get from Luka, the extra 3 assists per game you get from Luka, it's not worth the 12 percentage point difference in free throw percentage that you give up, in our mass opinions. And similarly, you get an extra 2.5 3-pointers per game from Luka. That's super valuable, but you're also getting 1.2 extra turnovers per game, and you're not getting the same level of steals and blocks per game as you would with Shai. So, it's this situation where I think in a 8 category league, this is a coin flip. We actually have in an 8 category format, we have Shai at 9.8 total value, Luka at 9.2 total value, much closer together. But that turnovers coupled with the free throw, I think makes Shai a much more valuable player from a rotisserie based perspective. Talking about points leagues and stuff like that, more of a coin flip again, but it's just the category based math, the way that it works. Shai being so good in free throw and Luka being so below average in both turnovers and free throw for the volume that he creates, make it an impediment to him being the 3rd best player in fantasy.
Yeah, and just to hammer that point home, for value in the categories, he's 1st in free throw percentage value. He's 2nd in points value. He's 2nd in steals value. He's just so good in 3 really, really important categories that, like you said, with Jokic, you could build SGA a lot of ways just because he's so good everywhere, really, besides turnovers. That's just a product. So, and I think you're betting on some growth. Again, I think losing Giddey kind of helps him a little bit too. Could get even more usage. Wouldn't be surprised if he outscores Luka, honestly. So, yeah, pretty easy.
Also, games played on that front. Like Shea has been healthier than Luka throughout his career. We've got Shea playing 5 more games than Luka in our projections as well. So, look, I think on a game-by-game basis, it is fairly close between the two. And I think in certain formats, you could absolutely argue for Luka above Shea. But 9 category, I think it's pretty clear that Shea should be ahead of Luka.
Yep. And I think that they're going to be playing for the 1 seed. So I think his risk isn't as high as it is for almost anyone in this first round here. So, yeah, I feel pretty good about SGA being ranked 3rd. As you mentioned, Luka Doncic is 4th here. Again, I mentioned off the top, this is a pretty big clear tier dip after this one. But, yeah, I mean, he's just absolute stat stuffer. But he does have some negatives that you kind of outlined here. Anything else you want to just add on Luka number 4?
Yeah, I would just add that we have it as a clear tier drop in 8 category leagues. So we have like tier 1 Wemby, tier 2 Jokic, like they're alone. And then tier 3 we have in 8 cat Shea and Luka. Tier 3 and 9 cat is like Shea. And then Luka is in a tier 4 because he closes that gap in 9 cat with the guys behind him. Now, that's to say I would still confidently draft him above those guys. So I'm saying the math suggests it's a closer tier than my feelings suggest. And my feelings are more confirmed with like our 8 category rankings or our points league rankings or different things like that. So just want to kind of highlight that note. But with Luka, we talked through it. The big thing for him is ultimately, he's not going to be a positive contributor in free throw percentage. He gets the line a bunch. He's not going to be a positive contributor in blocks. He won't hurt you there, but he's not a positive contributor there. And he's a big negative in turnovers, one of the biggest in the league in turnovers. So he's unbelievable in all the other categories. And that's what makes him the 4th ranked player in fantasy. But there are some negatives, and this is the tier where I would say the first 3 guys, and you always want to be drafting for value in your draft, just generally, and not worrying too much about how players align category wise until you get towards the rounding out portion of your roster. But I would say really with the first 3 guys, you don't have to worry about anything until very late in the draft when you're like, oh, I guess I'm a little bit light here. But once you start to get past that first group of 3, you start to have to be being conscious about some of the decisions you're making. Like if you spend another high premium pick on a player that's poor in turnover or poor in free throw with Luka, like really poor, like I'm saying, like if you paired like Luka with Trey or something like that, you on the turnover side, you have to start making decisions on like, am I punting a category in this 12 team league or different things like that. You don't have any of those conversations with the top 3 guys.
Yep. And again, I like that, I still think there's more growth for SGA, honestly. Like they're, pretty similar age-wise, but just the growth that SGA had in a faster offense, I think helps him. We'll talk about Tyrese Halliburton a little bit as well. But jumping his effective field goal percentage almost 6% or a little over 6% as a pick and roll handler with all the transition he's going to have, I just think he could just be so good. And I think I can't say that. I was going to say he might be closer to Jokic than he is to Luka behind him, but I don't think that's right. But yeah, he's clearly 3. But I do love Luka, obviously. And then, you're kind of sending that pick in. You kind of know what you're going to get. Pretty happy with that. Okay. Yep. So this is where things get pretty tricky because there's a bit of a clear tier dip here. Number 5, last second I put Embiid in there. I wanted to not do it, but I think we have him there. I didn't pull.
We have him 5th.
Yep. We have him 5th. So anyone listening to this podcast knows the deal. You know what you're going to get. You're going to get arguably a top 2 stat producer in fantasy, but you're going to get the most risk in missing games. That's really the whole story. Anything you want to add on him?
I would just say this is my least favorite spot to pick in drafts because you sort of feel held hostage by Joel Embiid because the upside is tantalizing, right? On a per game basis, we're talking about a player that is on par with any of the top 4 players, but the games is a real question mark for Joel Embiid. We only have him projected at 58 games. The way that we run our projections is if we give 58 games to a player, we then backfill the other 24 games with replacement level players, like basically an average player for a 12-team league. And he still ranks as our 5th best player, but he's tied. He's basically tied in total value with Anthony Davis. He has a slight edge over him and slightly ahead of Tyrese Halliburton, the guy who we have 7th in 9-cat formats as well. And my point being here is I'd much rather pick 7th or 8th than 5th. I'd much rather be towards the bottom of this tier and have other people have to make these difficult decisions for me than have me on the clock. And ultimately, I think the decision when you're looking at Joel Embiid is ultimately it's not between Joel Embiid and Anthony Davis, because I think that's kind of the same decision, right? It's like, how much am I going to get out of these guys? Do I want to take some of this risk in terms of the games played? Or do I want to go to players like Tyrese Halliburton or Jason Tatum, who have a much stronger track record of durability? I know Tyrese got dinged up a little bit this year, but a much stronger track record of durability and much fewer concerns. And they're just as capable players to kind of build around. And I think those decisions are like really, really challenging. And I think if you're playing in an overall contest where your league is like wrapping into other leagues, I think you swing for the fences and you take Joel. But if you're playing in like a 12-team league and you think you have like a pretty substantial advantage over your league mates, I think it's fine to take like a Halliburton or a Tatum here and just be like, I'm just punting off some of this risk because I know I can be better than my league mates elsewhere. And that's the thing I just really want to highlight is I think this is a 4-player tier for us in 9-cat formats that I'm comfortable with, the risks on the injured guys, but the stability of the stable guys. And how you want to build is kind of up to you, which path you want to take.
Yep. I have the same, but in different order. I do have Embiid. And again, this is so straightforward. We saw him break the record as like the best scorer per minute. But again, he's just has so much risk. And I'll add, I'm a little bit more comfortable taking him in Roto than I am in head-to-head, just because I have massive concerns that there's going to be late season risk for him. So there's just something to note there. And as you mentioned, if I'm on the clock, that's a tough click, man. Like, I don't know. I might just have to put Tatum, which we can get to next. Actually, we have Anthony Davis ranked number 6, as you mentioned there. That's pretty aggressive. We have him for 60 games, but he's just, he's like kind of Jokic-y, and his assists kind of don't get noticed. He almost had 4 assists per game last year. He's just so good for percentages. Obviously, the blocks are fantastic, just absolutely solid everywhere across the board, except the health risk. So yeah, really, really awesome player. He's probably people don't like to click AD because of all the locker room jokes, but anything to add on him?
Yeah, he was just extremely durable last year, and it feels like you're buying high a little bit. I mean, last year AD slipped into round 2 in some spots, and that was like that felt like you're getting such good value for the risk that you're taking on. But if you compare AD and Tatum, they're different positionally, so it's like difficult to compare. But just generally, like AD has the advantage heavily in field goal percentage, heavily in blocks, in steals, pretty decently as well there, in turnovers. In rebounds, and then he loses only small in points. Like the points gap isn't huge there. Again, the assist gap, as you mentioned, not huge there. And then the 3-pointers, huge gap in favor of Tatum. In the free throw percentage, good gap in favor of Tatum. But AD is like really, really valuable on a per game basis, similarly to Joel. It's just different, right? The difference is the categories that he impacts, blocks and steals, are super hard to fill in other places of the draft. So that's why Anthony Davis ends up being so valuable. I just ultimately think there's no circumstance I'd take AD before Embiid, because I feel like I'm taking the same risk, and I feel like Embiid's ceiling is just higher. And then so it's ultimately like a decision between those two, one of those two, which is Embiid, or a decision between the safety and security of Tatum, which is so safe and secure, and Halliburton. And I will just note that I am currently doing an industry draft only league that I was invited to by Adam King and Kingy and these guys who all did the industry pickup league last year. Josh Lloyd, Raphael Johnson, Dan Bespris. I apologize to other league mates that I'm forgetting in there, but I'm in a draft only league with them now where every game counts, and you just draft your team, no substitutions, no trades. It's like a best ball, but it's not best ball because everybody counts. And I had the 5th pick there, the pick that I told you all that I hate and I want no part of. I took Jason Tatum in that format because it's every game counts, and the penalties for missing games is so severe. So I took Tatum above our ranks, above Halliburton, above Anthony Davis, above Joel Embiid because of the format specifically. And that's really what I want to highlight here, is that based on how you interpret your league mates, your opponents, the format that you're playing, I could go with any of these 4 players in terms of how I'd go through things. If I was in a league that I know everybody's really assist starved and they love taking point guards early, like some of these leagues or some of your league mates might think assists are like so hard to get, and thus they're going to elevate all those kind of mid-tier point guards, the point guards that Mike and I will often talk about in his 150 when we do man versus machine, that the machine doesn't like as much as the man, because Mike plays for some of that scarcity in point guards, right? I might even take Halliburton here and just say, like, I'm taking Halliburton. I'm letting everybody else push up the point guards. I'll compete on assists on Halliburton alone, and then I'll round out my team with kind of more overall players. So I think there's a lot of different ways you can paint the canvas with this pick is the thing that I want to highlight. And knowing your league and your format is really important in the 5 through 7 slots. I think, I mean, 8 is just kind of whoever's left, I think, from this group.
Yeah, I probably just got to put Tatum 5. I just can't. I can't click him. I think for a 150 set, for your 150, I would probably have Tatum at 5 because I would feel so safe and secure with Jason Tatum. And the thing about Tatum, he does not grade as well as these guys in 9-cat leagues. He grades as our 8th best player. It looks like it's a little bit of a tier break in total value. But the thing about Tatum, here's the thing about Tatum: games played. 80, 79, 66, 64. Those were COVID shortened seasons. 76, 74, 74. You know exactly what you're getting every single year. And that safety and security and stability of what you're building around, there's no variance. There's no variance in selecting Jason Tatum, right? Like, certainly, okay, yeah, his points dropped last year from 30.1 to 26.9. He was 26.9 the year before that. His rebounds have been between 8 and 8.8 for the last 3 years. His assists between 4 and 4.9. He's the same player like every single year. And that stability is very valuable. And it's something that the projections themselves, just the math, the only way that they'd know how valuable that stability is if we were even more punishing to the guys for games risk. So I'm with you that, like, in certain formats, I'm like happy to just build around Tatum and know what I'm getting. Yep. And I'll add, his usage without KP was 29.9 and with him was 26.7. So KP missing some time. We think he's going to miss half the season for missed time. So he could get back up to, 28 points per game, maybe 28 and a half, maybe even 29 if he gets going there because of KP's usage being gone for, like we said, pretty much half the season there. Brad Stevens mentioned, they're expecting kind of around Christmas. And we don't think he's going to play back-to-backs, although the Celtics don't have many of those. So, yeah, I feel pretty good about that. Then, as you mentioned, kind of the 8th player, the rankings you mentioned have him 8th. 7th in the rankings is Tyrese Halliburton. I have him behind Tatum there at number 7 there. So, yeah, assists. The big question is what happened post-break? How much was it health-related? He missed so many three-pointers after the break. Do we just disregard that, going 40% from 3 pre-break to 30 post? How much of this poor play late in the season was because of his hamstring injury? I don't know. I feel like I think he gets a pass based on how the rankings and I have him. We're kind of giving him a pass for that second half.
Yeah, I think he gets a pass too. And I think ultimately the adjustment period in season with playing with Pascal Siakam plus the injury are like 2 things to be like, you know what? Those are like 2 things to be a little bit concerned about in terms of the projection for Tyrese. So the other thing that I note, we're a little bit hot on his assists versus the market. I could see us pulling down a little bit there. And then maybe that would shift him a little bit further closer to Tatum and whatnot. I think for most people, I think he's going to be the 8th pick. The other thing that we can mention is that for us, we have Tyrese above Giannis, and not everybody's going to agree with that. And we'll get to it, but a lot of people will have Giannis in the top 6, 7. Obviously, Giannis points, rebounds, assists. He looks like Luka Doncic in a lot of these categories. It's just that the free throw is just such a killer. And so that's ultimately like the issue with Giannis, that the free throw is a killer. The blocks are, not the blocks. The 3-pointers are not kind of up to par, and the turnovers are really elevated. And so Giannis is sort of like super juiced downside of Luka, but like the same offensive upside. And so we just have him like out, closer to 10 or outside the top 10 than we do clearly inside. And that also is like a build structure approach. Like if you want to punt for a free throw and you're comfortable doing that, and you're playing like head-to-head category base where every week you're like, I'm just trying to win like 6-7 categories versus my opponent, and I'm okay dumping one of them to load up on others, then Giannis is a great build. And he would like if we wanted to punt free throw, Giannis would go way up in our projections and our rankings. So understanding kind of how all these inputs kind of mix together in your league format is just really, really important.
Yeah, so the 9 Cats have Giannis at 11. Pretty much, he had like the unhealthiest 73-game season I've ever seen for a guy who was always on the injury report. But obviously, I mean, the guy just dominates a field goal percentage. So, yeah, if you are playing head-to-head and you're playing a 9-Cat league, Giannis punt teams are very, very viable. It's going to be a very popular strategy by people who play in that format. And again, it's a good one. He's really good. His assists are really strong, almost 7 a game. Dame didn't hurt him at all. The minutes went way up without Budenholzer as well, so he had a lot working in his favor there. I have him 9th in mine, which again feels low because he's so dominant. But yeah, you can't ignore the free throw percentage. Maybe it was the 10 counts has kind of messed him up because his trajectory was like kind of going up. I remember not too long ago he was shooting like upper 70s, 76% in 2017-18, and he's just kind of lost it there. So yeah, a little bit of a tier gap, I think, for most people there. So that covers the top. So the top 8 we have on the rankings: Wemby, Jokic, SGA, Luka, Embiid, AD, Tyrese, and Tatum. Big tier dip here. I feel like those guys are kind of locked and loaded. The 9-Cat rankings for ETR, we have Chet Holmgren 9th. Very durable season, played 82. Obviously, the awesome offenses are, we talk about that in football a lot, being tied to good offenses. Hey, Tyrese Halliburton, the Pacers scored 123 points per game. The OKC's going to score a ton of points. How strongly do you feel about, Chet being a guy who was going like, almost like 4 or 5 turn last year? I think he was like ranked in the 40s. Just a massive dip, massive boost here.
He's not going to go as high as we project him. I don't think people are going to love. I think he's going to go like mid-second round. And so we are high on Chet Holmgren. The question mark will ultimately be like, how much does Isaiah Hartenstein's presence impact Chet Holmgren from a category perspective? I will note we are not expecting him to impact Chet Holmgren significantly, in part because we just think that OKC is going to be better on the boards entirely as a team. And thus the production that Isaiah Hartenstein competes with for Chet won't actually be a big hit to Chet. So we also, third year player, but second year playing after missing all of his first season after being drafted. We have him showing growth. So we have him last year, he averaged 16.5 points per game, 7.9 rebounds, 2.4 assists, 0.6 steals, 2.3 blocks. We're at 17.6 points, 8 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 0.7 steals, 2.4 blocks. So we're just up a little bit across the board on him. And then he shot really well from the field, 53% last year. We're at 52.8. 78% from the line is what we're projecting. He was 79% last year. So he's one of these guys that he also doesn't turn the ball over at all. So for 9-Cats, like the difference between his ranking in 8-Cat and 9-Cat is wild. In 8-Cat, we have him 16th. In 9-Cat, we have him 9th. But 9th is like a tier that honestly, I mean, you could make a case on kind of anyone 9 through, I mean, it gets into the 20s, honestly. Like it's a really, really long flat tier, which is why it's such an advantage to draft in the top half, is because those guys you're getting in round 2 and 3 aren't much different than the guys that people are taking at the end of round 1. So our ranking is aggressive on Chet. It's not expecting any sort of drop off in his production from last season. Maybe Hartenstein impacts that more. I don't think you have to draft him here though. So I probably wouldn't draft him at 9. If I had the 9th pick, I'd probably be aiming to draft him at 16. And I think you get him like half the time at that level. And I'd be okay with that. So I'd be drafting him more the 10, 11, 12 spots, because you'll get him at 13, 14, 15 pretty consistently. And so I don't think you have to draft him here, but just a note that like the ability to build around a big who shoots the ball well at the free throw line and makes threes is super valuable. It's like we talked about Jokic being a cheat code because he does all this plus assists. Chet doesn't do the assist part, but all the other stuff is very cheat code-ish in terms of a big that shoots threes and makes his free throws.
Yep, and the blocks, and there's room for growth here too. He's still super young. He's 22 years old. Obviously, didn't play his quote unquote rookie season when he got drafted, but he still needs to work on his left hand. I think that could be some growth there. His layups were really good. He shot 59% on layups. I talked about Wemby being kind of bad there, 52.7 from one. So he's not like 60% on layups as a rookie is really, really good. So he's already really established. Again, playing with SGA, playing this offense, getting so much transition scoring, being a really good spot-up player as a rookie big at 52 EFG is so good. So yeah, he's like sure, if he gets hurt, he could burn you, but like you're not going to look back and like, oh, why did I take Chet at 10, 11, 12? I have him ranked 11. He's just like so solid to be so good everywhere in an offense. I want to be I want pieces of for sure. So absolutely love Chet there. Again, I have him 11. The rankings have him 9. Going to number 10. This is probably where the rankings that I disagree the most. We have Donovan Mitchell at 10, which is quite aggressive. We're going to maybe dig into that more. But why are we so high on Donovan?
All of this is small advantages. So like I said, this tier is like really, really big. I would say that you could mark Donovan anywhere from 10 to 13 pretty comfortably. Maybe even a little bit lower if you were higher on some other guys right below him. But with Donovan, like it's just really solid production kind of across the board. And he's still in his prime. This will be his age 28 season. Last two seasons with the Cavs, he's averaged 27.5 points per game, just over 5 assists, just over 4.5 rebounds, 1.5 steals. He's a big contributor in the steals category, in a way that like separates him from a lot of his competitors in this tier. And he just doesn't hurt you anywhere. Like, where does he hurt you? He hurts you. He's a relatively low turnover guy for the top guys. And then he hurts you in blocks and field goal percentage a little bit, but he shot 47.5% his 2 years with the Cavs. That's not going to hurt you. So it's more of like, he doesn't hurt you anywhere. Again, another guy that I don't think you have to draft here. It's a tricky part of the draft. Like anyone that you argue for me, 9 through 13 or 14, I'd be like, yeah, I get it. I understand. I know what I don't disagree. So that's my case on Donovan Mitchell. Is just the math likes him a little bit more than these guys, but like I don't feel strongly about it.
Yeah, like
eight cat. By the way, eight cat. We have him 13th for what it's worth.
Okay.
So like a big part of the value is that he doesn't turn the ball over as much as the top guys.
Yeah, it just goes back to the offense thing for me. Is why I don't have him there. I have him. I think 14th, so I'm not too far off. But I just wish he was on a better offense, man. And maybe that is it. Maybe that is it. Maybe Atkinson plays differently, So I can kind of get there because he's so good in transition. He was 4th in transition efficiency last year, behind Zion, Kevin Durant, and Devin Booker, among the 77 guys with 200 attempts. So if Atkinson does make them faster, like that's a slam dunk pick in the first round to close out, and he could, kind of. I think he's. I'll talk about Ant Edwards in a second, but I think like there's room for Donovan to get better because of the coaching change. You could make it, if you did an article on that, he would probably be the cover boy if I wrote that, and maybe I will do that. But yeah, I think that he's a pretty sound pick. Again, you're not going to want to pick in the back end, but I feel pretty good about him overall.
Well, you made the comparison there to Anthony Edwards, and I think that's such a good comparison because Anthony Edwards has a lot more sex appeal to his name. But I will just read the production and the projections from what we have between these two players, because I think it's important to understand, like, they're basically the same player from a fantasy perspective. In terms of the production last year, Anthony Edwards, 25.9 points per game. Donovan Mitchell, 26.6 points per game. Donovan Mitchell, 5.1 rebounds per game. Anthony Edwards, 5.4 rebounds per game. Anthony Edwards, 5.1 assists per game. Donovan Mitchell, 6.1 assists per game. Anthony Edwards, 1.3 steals. Donovan Mitchell, 1.8 steals. Anthony Edwards, 0.5 blocks. Donovan Mitchell, 0.5 blocks. Anthony Edwards 3.1 turnovers, Donovan Mitchell 2.8 turnovers. 3-pointers per game, Donovan Mitchell 3.3, Anthony Edwards 2.4. Donovan Mitchell was better than Anthony Edwards in every single category basically last year. And I think the perception is that Anthony Edwards has so much more room to grow. And look, Anthony Edwards is going to be 23. He has a lot of room to grow. He's awesome. But from a projection standpoint, we have the two of them almost identical across the board. The big difference between the two of them is that we have Donovan for 0.8 more 3-pointers made per game, and we have him shooting 86% from the line, and Anthony Edwards 80% from the line. That's the big difference between the two of them. So, like, those two, similar to where I said, like, Joel Embiid and Anthony Davis are like the same player. You're just making a decision on whether you want that type of player. I feel the same way about Donovan Mitchell and Anthony Edwards. My guess is Anthony Edwards will often go higher just because the perception that there's more room for him to grow.
Yeah, I'm going to early capitulate. I'm going to move him to 12. I'm buying the Atkinson thing. I think the Atkinson thing could boost them. They were 24th in pace last year. The Cavs were. If the Cavs turn into like 15th in pace, that's going to boost him, man. I think and Donovan's, like I mentioned, he's so good in transition. He's been so good in transition for years. So I think catering their offense more to him is something Atkinson likes to do. So yeah, I'm going to buy that coaching improvement there. Nothing against JB Bickerstaff. And then number 12, we talked about Giannis already at 11. We don't need to hit that again. But number 12, we do have Anthony Edwards. Again, certainly some growth. Yeah, he's probably not going to make it. Actually, he did fall in your draft a little bit, but yeah. It feels like this was I think Trey's knocking on the door here. But how do you feel about Ant as the last pick in round 1 for us?
So I think Ant's super solid. He actually fell just before me, almost one more pick to me, which again, I hate the 5 spot. Like it also, like, in terms of who comes back to you on the other end, you feel like there's a little bit of a teardrop as well. So it's just a difficult spot to draft from. But I think Anthony Edwards, like Donovan Mitchell, I think they're both like super solid. And then Anthony Edwards, the big advantage he would have over Donovan Mitchell's, we're projecting him for 10 more games than Donovan Mitchell, because he is just super, super durable year over year. So, and he plays through everything. I mean, we thought the ankle sprain was going to knock him out last year, and which ankle sprain? Like, there were 3 of them we thought would knock him out for extended periods of time, and he didn't miss any games. So played 79 games last year, 79 games the year before, 72 games the year before that. So just incredibly productive player and durable player, rock solid. The guys that I would just note that I think you could make a case for in this tier from like a total value perspective, I'll just in 9 cat, we have these guys between 4.7 and 5.7 in total value. So a 1 point difference, which is basically the same difference between 9 and going up to 5 through 8, right? And that's Chet Holmgren, Donovan Mitchell, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Anthony Edwards, Domantas Sabonis, Tyrese Maxey, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant. Any of those guys, I think. And then we've got, like, knocking on the door there, James Harden. The one guy that you'll note is an omission in the 9 cat is Trae Young, and it's because he is just a disaster for turnovers and field goal. In 8 cat leagues, we have him 9th overall. So like his adjustment moves wildly when you get into like 8 cat formats, and he could be included in that group, as could James Harden in Steph Curry when you move up to 8 cats. So like I would say the top 18 feel like a little bit of like a tier for me. And then you get into like Kawhi Leonard, Scotty Barnes, Devin Booker, that type of group, which feels like it's a little bit of a step down, both in terms of the category production you get, the reliability of health, and so on and so forth. So really, and this is why, again, highlighting, if I'm saying there's a step down after around 18 or so, hey, that first 3 picks, because 4 and 5, 4 is good, but 5 you feel trapped, and then you also likely hit this tier drop. That's really frustrating. It's just tough. So I think those top, because the top 2 picks, you're getting involved in this next tier, and you're getting 2 picks in this next tier, and then you're out of it. And then again, the 5th spot has to deal with another tier drop basically, and then the back half deals with another tier drop. And so it's just such an advantage. I would highly recommend, if you're playing in like overall type format leagues or different things like that, that you make sure you play in league formats that have a 3rd round reversal, because it's like really important. If you're like, otherwise you are giving up a lot of your equity in your entry in simply the lottery ball of where the draft pick ends up. And I don't love that. So if like auction solves this, third round reversal neutralizes it some bit. But if I was playing like a high stakes entry in an overall contest where pick selection was randomized, I'd be hesitant to want to put my dollars behind it because so much of my equity is cut immediately if I don't get a top 4 or 5 pick.
Yep, 100%. Don't have too much to add on that, but I'll say Trey. Like to your point, not just picking like just to say it another way, like if you pick 12th and you don't take a point guard there or you don't take a big man there, you are crossing your fingers that Jalen Brunson falls to 36, Bam falls to 36. If that doesn't happen, you're just chasing those two positions so bad. So point guards and bigs are just like we were saying with Tatum. You usually aren't drafting. You're like, oh, I really need a small forward at pick 75. In underdogs, obviously it's different, but in season long, so positional scarcity is certainly a factor, and that's why I have Trey at the 12-13. And so what? If I lose turnovers, who cares? I just think they're still going to play fast. Obviously, I trust Quinn Snyder's system, and losing DeJounte could take him, back to where he was before, scoring close to 30 a game. So, yeah, that pretty much covers it. Any other parting shots for this top 12 we have?
No, I'm excited to dig on some of the guys who are a little bit higher than the market on, and just make sure and double check. But again, these are like tiers, so like guys are probably still moving in the same tier regardless. But I think it's a good exercise to get people comfortable, especially people. I know a lot of fantasy basketball players poured over from fantasy football. We're towards the end of fantasy football draft season. They haven't been looking at basketball stuff the whole year. I think just getting familiarized with the first round targets and what you're thinking about when you're drafting at each of those positions is a helpful strategy or helpful reminder and refresher as you prepare for the start of the season. So hopefully this hits home with the audience, and look forward to diving in on more of this draft prep content. Although I will be taking off the next 2 pods as I get one last week in Europe before NFL and NBA season starts.
Yep. I'm a month from now. I'll be sitting on a beach in Maui, and actually, I misspoke last pod. I come back the day before NBA Media Day for 2018, so worked perfectly. So very excited for that. But yeah, a lot of big trends here. A lot of just so many of these teams we talked about, like so much pace, like almost of the top 8 teams in pace, we talked about all of them. The only one we didn't talk about, number 1 team in pace last year, who probably won't have anyone in the top 50 or 60. It's the Washington Wizards. We're going to be horrible. So yeah, that's going to do it for this edition. I'm not sure what we're going to do for the next pod. Maybe I'll do the coaching thing for the next pod. That sounds like a fun one. So appreciate everyone listening. Good luck with your fantasy football drafts. Check out the ETR NFL guys. They are just crushing it over there. And we'll catch you guys next time.